Sorry, members, I really have to push you now. It's getting close to 7 o'clock and we have to get started soon.
Are we ready, members? We're about to get started. Okay, good evening, members and officers of the Council. I would like to welcome you to the first meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. Nice to meet some new people this evening and see some people I've known for a while. Before we dive into the agenda, there's a few bits of housekeeping, but I also have a couple of comments I wanted to make from the Chair. As we have heard from the training, this is a really important committee. We have a duty as members to take this quite seriously. This is not overview and scrutiny. This is a Governance and Audit Committee, and I know we're going to work together to fulfil our purpose. I do have some apologies to members to make. I know there's been quite a bit of disruption to the training. Apologies, there's been various cancellations. We just about got there. I know there's also been a couple of things with the agenda. I know a note was sent out today about one of the tables and one of the agenda items hadn't come across properly formatted. Hopefully everybody was able to access the agenda. And the final thing was we've had a bit of back and forth. You'll notice that Labour are down one member this evening because we've been notified that Cabinet members shouldn't be sitting on Governance and Audit. So there will be some changes with the membership of the committee going forward, but just to explain some of the changes. So going into the housekeeping side of it, if the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs. Please do not use the lifts. Assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise you when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. Does anyone intend to film this evening? Okay, that's a good sign. Would everyone please make sure that their phones are turned to silent and they're not used to make or receive phone calls in the chamber while the meeting is in progress? And please note that this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and will be subsequently broadcast on the Council's YouTube account. That is all of the formal notices. I have a couple more updates. First of all, this is a big agenda for this meeting. And I know for quite a few people, this is your first Governance and Audit Committee. So I know that there's quite a lot to go through. There's a reason for that, and throughout the agenda we will go through that. But I just wanted from myself and from Christian as Vice Chair to thank the officers for pulling this together. I think it was quite a feat to get everything together. There's a couple of points that I think it's important I raise as Chair before we get started. Some people may notice that Councillor Yates is in attendance. Councillor Yates is intending to speak under Rule 20.1 on agendas items 4, 5 and 6. I think it's an important point to note because there has to be a clear separation between the Cabinet and the Governance and Audit Committee. But I would be eager, and I know from speaking to Councillor Yates he would, to hear what members' thoughts are on various agenda items, because most of these agenda items relates to Councillor Yates's portfolio. So we are completely separate to make our own decisions, but as an opportunity to potentially bring some of this closer together so that Cabinet can hear the discussions that we are having, I would like to thank Councillor Yates for attending. I'm not sure he'll be at every meeting, but I wanted to reach out to him. Second thing to say, and I've spoken to officers about it, and I know I'm going on a little bit at the start, but we have a massive agenda to get through. Council constitutional rules are quite clear that they apply to committees. Any member introducing an item or proposing a motion has 5 minutes to speak. Anybody else on a debate has 3 minutes, and people, unless the chair allows it, can't keep coming back and forth. Those are the rules. The reality is we want to be flexible. Everybody wants to have their say and ask questions. But just because we've got a lot to get through, and I'm sure we don't want to all be here till midnight or 11 o'clock, we will need to make sure that we follow those rules of debate where possible. So that is enough from me for now. So we're going to move on to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence. We have 2 apologies that I'm aware of. We have Councillor Faruqi and we also have Councillor Packman, who are being subbed for by Councillor Britcher and Councillor Matterface. Are there any other apologies? Nope. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 2 then, declaration of interest. Do any members have a declaration that they wish to declare? Nope. Okay, we will move on to agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of March 2023. I will just make one point. Of the people who are on the committee at the last meeting, there are only 2 surviving members, which is Councillor Towning and Councillor Garner. I've spoken to them and said that as they were the only ones present, it probably makes sense that they propose and second, because they can actually say it was a true and accurate record. But before we get to that, does anybody have any questions or points on the minutes? Councillor Bright.
Thank you, Chair. Being a geek, I was watching the last Governance and Audit meeting, and there was something that wasn't covered in the minutes of the November Governance and Audit meeting, which was around cash flow, cash collection and parking enforcement. Is that coming up in agenda item 9 or 10 at all? Do we have a report on that?
Chris, do you have anything to...
So we've got within the quarterly internal audit update report, we've got an update on car parking, the audit that was done there. And we've got the head of service that's for neighbourhoods, Penny Button, with us, who is responsible for car parking, who will be able to give the committee an update in terms of how the service has progressed since that internal audit, following Simon's update on the matter.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, can I have a proposer and a seconder for the minutes? Councillor Towning, you happy to propose? Councillor Garner, second. Our members agree that they're a true and accurate record? Yeah. Thank you very much. See, we're whizzing through it. We'll be done in no time. Agenda item 4, external auditors audit finding reports. I'm going to pass over to Chris Blundell to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. So just before I pass on to Nick Halliwell from Grant Thornton, who will lead on this item, as Grant Thornton have produced this report. This, as I set out in the training earlier on, is Grant Thornton providing their assurance to you as a committee on the work that's been done on our 2021 accounts. There's the item at item 5 is the actual accounts themselves, but it's important that you hear from the auditors themselves and you receive that report before you consider the accounts. So that's why they've been brought to you in this order. The only other thing I wish to bring to your attention, also offer an apology, is that there is a typo in the report, in the body of the report, in the introductory section. It relates to 1920. Guilty as charged as rolling forward last year's report, where it actually does indeed relate to the 2021. So if it's okay, Chair, I shall now pass over to Nick Halliwell from Grant Thornton, who will present the audit findings report.
Thanks, Chris. So I was going to give a sort of high-level overview, because I know you've got a lot of things on the agenda at the meeting, and our report's obviously very large. So this is our audit findings report for the 2020-21 financial year end. Obviously, this is quite out of date at this stage, given it's now 2 years past that point. As I think Chris gave some training around the reasons and factors behind those delays in terms of the audits. There were also some specific factors at the council that led to delays, specifically around the governance issues that we identified in our statutory recommendations, as well as additional work that was required on provisions relating to grievance matters and disciplinary matters, as well as the Birth 4/5. In terms of our audit opinion on the financial statements, our expected opinion is an unmodified and clean audit opinion of the financial statements. In terms of the audit adjustments, there weren't a great deal of audit adjustments. There are some areas where we required adjustments to the accounts, but versus other councils, it's a fairly clean audit report in terms of actually the financial statements being correct. In terms of the way we give our assessment of the audit opinion, what we do is we give reasonable assurance the accounts are correct. And in doing so, we set a materiality level that we work to. So the materiality level that we've set for the council is 2.6 million. So our opinion is giving that assurance that we're satisfied that the accounts are fairly stated within that balance and that reasonable assurance on that. The way we set the materiality is is typical across the public sector audits that we do. So we set it based on gross expenditure. So we've set it on 2% of the council's gross expenditure. In terms of our audit opinion that we will be issuing, the audit opinion will make reference to our value for money opinion. Our value for money opinion is still ongoing. The reason it is unable to be completed at this stage is that we have 7 outstanding objections regarding the council's accounts, and until the work on those objections is complete, we are unable to certify our value for money opinion. But when, in the opinion that we will provide, it will make reference to the fact that there were statutory recommendations and that there was a significant weakness, in our opinion, in relation to the council's governance arrangements in the 2020-21 financial year. In terms of the timeframes of the value for money report, we are looking to take a paper to committee that will cover the 2020-21 arrangements, the 21-22 arrangements, and the 22-23 arrangements. So that's in September that we're looking to provide that report to the committee. So that, I think that will be quite a helpful report, because clearly the financial statements report that we're providing you now is quite out of date. That should give you an up-to-date view of our view of the council's governance arrangements, ability to deliver economy, efficiency and effectiveness, and also financial sustainability. I was going to pause there and just see if you've got any questions around the papers.
Before we go into questions, I have Councillor Yates wishing to speak under 20.1. Councillor Yates, I think you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. As Councillor Scobie, the Chair, has said, I'm just here to add a bit of flavour and a bit of context, really, because it's your role to, as Governance and Audit Committee, to look into a lot of these questions further. I just wanted to speak on this point and just say that some of the decisions we make in this council do have large financial impacts, and if you look on page 10 and page 11 of this report, it's mentioning net pension liabilities of £102.7 million, and the decision the full council made to bring East Kent Housing in-house also brought it in £10.6 million of pension liability and 6.9 million of pension assets. So there's a net impact of 3.6 million. So I just wanted to highlight the financial impacts of some of the decisions that get made here, and just, yeah, make that point. Thank you.
Do any members have any questions or any points they wish to make? No? The only comment I had is, obviously, when this your report and the accounts were brought to the pre-meeting governance and audit, one of my concerns was, why has this been delayed? As a new councillor onto the committee, why has this been delayed? Within your report, I think it's page 28 of our agenda, which is, I think, page 16 of your report. If any members have any queries, that sets out exactly the time frames and some of the reasons why. So I found that quite useful, and I think others may. Any other questions? Okay, well, this agenda item is down that the audit findings report for 2020-21 be considered. Yep, sure.
I was just looking at the on page 28 of our agenda. I think I've got the right audit. This is audit. There was a point on where you say that the committee was written to by the external auditor with concerns regarding a lack of governance, and no action was taken by this committee. Now, obviously, it's a different committee. As Councillor Scobie just said, there's only 2 members that were on last year's, let alone 2 or 3 years ago. Are we happy internally about what are the risks that, why was no action taken at the time? Does anyone know? And are we confident in our ability as a committee to be able to take action should such a letter arrive in the future?
Do any officers wish to respond to that? Yep.
Chair,
Chris.
Thank you. If I recall correctly, the period of time that we were in, it was obviously I note the comments that Grant Thornton have made. Also in relation to, if I just may add before sort of answering the specific question, in relation to the value for money opinion that Nick said has been delayed, when Grant Thornton took the decision to issue statutory recommendations back in October of 2021, that effectively supersedes, if you're looking at a hierarchy of action, that an auditor can take. They can provide an adverse value for money opinion, where effectively they're saying the council doesn't have arrangements in place to provide value for money. Over and above that, they can issue statutory recommendations. The top level is a public interest report. So in terms of looking at value for money, apologies for the crudity of the language in the terms of the delay I'm using, the horse had already bolted, so to speak, in terms of providing a value for money, because they'd already issued statutory recommendations. So they've already taken some action in relation to that. Why the committee didn't address those concerns, it wasn't just from the external auditors. Christine Parker, as head of internal audit, had written to the 3 statutory officers at the time, and also to the chair of the Governance and Audit Committee. However, I think, unfortunately, it was a very complex matter that was being dealt with by another committee, in terms of they were primarily staffing matters that were being dealt with by the Council's General Purpose Committee and its Investigatory and Disciplinary Subcommittee. So for the committee to take any action at that time could have potentially prejudiced a matter that was live and being dealt by another committee, another body of the council. That's my understanding, unless Christine or Samira, you've got anything else that you can add. No. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Councillor Townley.
Yeah, I just want to echo exactly what Chris has just said. We did raise issues, as you have highlighted at the moment, but because of what was going on, we could not instigate a further investigation during that period. I certainly raised issues which I've just spoken to Nick about, which were also told we can't go forward with till those investigations were completed. And they were completed quite some time later, but it wasn't anything that we were neglecting. We were very much aware.
Thank you, Councillor Townley. Anyone else have any comments? No? Okay, so recommendation here is that the audit findings report for 2020-2021 be considered as laid out in Annex 1. I believe we have considered it. Can I have a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Donaldson proposing, Councillor Towning seconding. Everybody agreed?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, moving on to agenda item 5, which is related to agenda item 4. I'm going to pass over to Chris Blundell.
Thank you, Chair. Buckle yourself in. We're going to go through the accounts page by page. No, we won't. Don't worry. Okay, so these are the accounts for 2021. As I've set out previously, they are 2 years late. However, we did publish our draft accounts on time. Nick referred rightly to some of the issues that related to the delay in the audit. Just to appreciate, this was a previous item, a bit of context around that. There were governance issues at the authority, and it was appropriate for Grant Thornton to delay it. That is part of the reason why we are where we are with them now, and why we've got the delay that we have in terms of futures. I will hand over to Matt, who will give a bit more of an overview in terms of that, the progress that we're making with next year's accounts. You've received the assurance from Grant Thornton that, as he said, the accounts are relatively clean. That's something we're very proud of in terms of the quality of the work that's been produced. But there's a trade-off, and I'm being honest here in terms of accounts and how useful they are. Accuracy is one part of it, but timeliness is the other. And there's a compromise between the two, and it's important that you have information on a timely basis, regardless of the accuracy. That's not to do with the accounts production period process for this year, but we are fully committed to making sure we're getting timely accounts to you going forwards, and we've got a plan in place to do that. But before I steal any more of his thunder, I'll pass over to Matt Sanham, who is our Financial Services Manager and who leads on the production of our financial statements.
Thanks, Chris. There's a bit of duplication here, as you can imagine, because of the nature of the reports that are being put in front of you, but just way of an intro. The report covers the financial statements, or the accounts, as you will, for 2021 financial year. The context, the draft accounts were previously signed and published in line with legislation on the 30th of July 2021, and were then due to be considered by this committee in December 2021, with engagement sessions booked and facilitated with members at the time. However, due to various issues, including what Nick has said and Chris has covered, the issuing of the Section 24 statutory recommendations by Grant Thornton, ongoing discussions around Birth 45, staff resources, a case review of Grant Thornton by the Financial Reporting Council, and finally the large proportion of audit fieldwork that needed to be undertaken remotely due to the various issues in 2021, 21, 22 with COVID and such. This has understandably had some impact on the timeliness of the audit. Grant Thornton is required to report to those charged with governance whether the Council's financial statements present a true and fair view of the financial position, its expenditure and income for the year, and whether they have been properly prepared. Grant Thornton's audit findings report was previously covered as a separate report to this committee setting out their audit findings. The auditors concluded that, subject to completion of a few final tasks, they anticipate providing an unmodified opinion of the accounts. An unmodified opinion is expressed when the auditor is able to conclude that the financial statements give a true and fair view and comply in all material respects with the relevant financial reporting framework. From a value for money perspective, the auditors are also required to reach a formal conclusion on whether the Council has put in place proper arrangements to secure value for money. The Council received a number of objections, as covered off, 7, as Nick said, outstanding, to the accounts on the grounds of the Council's arrangements to secure value for money. The auditors are examining the issues that have been raised, but in some instances these issues span multiple years, obviously where they're linked to governance and such. There are a number of objections to the accounts that remain outstanding for prior years, and a separate report will be brought to this committee in September covering 21, 22, 22, 23, as well as a backward look in relation to 18, 19, 19, 20 and 2021, hopefully closing off all outstanding issues pertaining to value for money. Finally, before final sign-off of the accounts by Grant Thornton and the issuing of an unqualified or unmodified opinion, a letter of representation needs to be signed off by the Chief Finance Officer or Section 151, as Chris, as well as the Chair of this committee. This will enable publication on the Council's website, which then fulfils our legal requirements. This representation letter is provided in connection with the audit of the financial statements of Thanet Council for the year ended 31st March 21 for the purpose of expressing an opinion as to whether the Council's financial statements give the true and fair opinion as described previously. The version contained at Annex 2 of this report was for illustration purposes, and the final version, which is largely unchanged, will present it to the Chair for signature. As way of a further update, the accounts for 21, 22 and 22, 23 will be starting an audit in relation to those, so Grant Thornton will be in around October time provisionally. We will then look at doing 21, 22 and 22, 23 in tandem, and the expectation is the 21, 22 accounts will go for publication next month, so by which point we can draw a line under and move forward with the audit. That's it from me.
Thank you very much.
Unless there's any questions.
So I've got Councillor Yates speaking under 20.1. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add a bit of flavour to the situation in 2021, as I was quite heavily involved in the COVID grant situation. So I just wanted to say that I think it's on page 13, there was an extraordinary moment where the council was actually, on top of its doing its daily job, was responsible for administering £55 million of COVID grants. And just wanted to thank the council and the Civica for doing that. And it wasn't just one grant. I think there was about 6 or 7, each with their own specifications of how it's being issued, and to manage and administer that scheme on top of their day jobs. It was quite a lot of work, and it just, I think in this, on page 14, it highlights that just one scheme alone resulted in 5,500 emails between officers, and I can well believe that, as I was involved with the businesses during that period of time. So yeah, it's been a busy time. Thanks.
Do any members have any questions? I have one. On page 75 of our agenda, 19 of the report, it talks about council tax recovery, that due to the pandemic there was no enforcement activity, so there was loss of income. When we have the next 2 sets of accounts, are we like to see council tax income higher because we're able to pick up enforcement, or is that lost revenue completely? So this is page 75 of the report under Deputy Chief Executive and Section 151 Officer. That's just that final bullet point.
So because that income was effectively as a result of court summonses, because they closed down the courts and there were no cases, all the cases were then brought back together in the following year when the courts are open. So there's not going to be an increase in income. That income is effectively lost as a result of the pandemic. They weren't there. Those debts will still be pursued, but they won't have been taken forward in that year. They would have consolidated that with the recovery action that was taken in the following year. So if that makes sense, there's no additional income expected as a result of that.
So if I can just add a little bit to that. So this line here, where we're talking about the loss of income, as Matt has accurately said, this is the income we get from the court in terms of if someone is in arrears, they have to pay a court summons fee, and we receive some of that. That was combined, so we'd lost that. In terms of council tax itself, we didn't undertake any recovery action during the pandemic for obviously the appropriate reasons at the time. People were going through a period of extreme stress and hardship. We have been able to recover a large amount of those cases that were in arrears, and also offer some support during that time. It's difficult to throw your mind back, because actually it's been superseded by the most recent crisis, which has been the energy crisis. And we've administered rebates of £150 to people over just the last year or so, and further support to people who are also struggling with their council tax. However, council tax collection is still pretty healthy. Within the year, we tend to collect about 95% of the council tax that's been billed for a year, but over a sort of 4 to 5 year period, collection is much closer to 99% of the overall tax that we bill for, which is one of the most effective tax collection rates. If you compare it to other forms of tax, we've got a very high collection rate. Council tax has its criticisms for various reasons, but it's actually a very effective and efficient tax to collect.
Any other members want to ask any questions? Nope. So this agenda, this agenda item, the recommendation is that the committee approves the statement of accounts for 2020-2021, and that the committee notes the letter of representation to Grant Thornton issued by the Director of Corporate Services and Section 151 officer. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Britcher is proposing, and Councillor Bright is seconding. Are members agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, we are halfway through the agenda, folks. This is good. That is 238 pages down. So agenda item 6, we have the Corporate Risk Management Quarterly Update, and over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a standing item on the agenda. It will be presented to each meeting of the committee, that takes you through our highest risks, highest profile risks, highest scoring risks across the whole council. So at the front of the first part of the report just takes you through a bit of the context of how we manage risks in the across the organisation. If I can bring your attention to section 3, I'll go to the agenda pack so I can give the exact page. Let's have a look. So on page 243, there's a table that sets out how we evaluate our risks. So you'll see along the top the headings there. Risk can be categorized into different packages, different categories of risks. We will consider whether we're faced with a reputational, a strategic, a well-being, a service delivery, a financial or compliance risk. So we'll assess the issue, we'll assess the risk that we're facing across those different categories, and then we consider whether it falls into the severe, significant, moderate or minor category, and we'll give it a score depending on which one it scores on highest across all of those categories. So we may consider that something is unlikely to cause adverse publicity, has no significant impact on the delivery of council's priorities, isn't going to impact on staff morale, there's no difficulty providing service delivery, and there isn't a breach of policy, but if we don't do it, we may have a financial risk that's greater than £500,000. So although all the others are minor, because it's hit severe in one category, we'd give it a 4 for impact in terms of how it affects us. So that the impact of a risk is how bad it would be if it actually happened. On the next page, we've got the likelihood. So this looks at the possibility or the probability of something happening. And you've got, again, 4 different categories, whether it's rare, unlikely, likely, or very likely. And it will be given a score depending on the probability of somewhere between 1 and 4. We then combine those 2 scores together in this matrix just under section 3.9 that gives this overall score that's set out on that colour grid. And what we're looking at here in this report are all the risks that are in that red or the amber section that are scoring higher than 8 or 9. There are other risks that they're set out in the annex that we're still managing and we're considering, but we're bringing the risk to you that after consideration of all the mitigating action that we're still faced with these really significant risks. So if I then move us on to page 245 under section 4, this is the nuts and bolts of the actual report. The table there at section 4.2 sets out the risks, sets out the description of what the risk is, what the score was at of the risk the last time it came to the committee in March. You see it's March 23 score, and then how we're scoring it now in July 23. Finally, a bit of narrative to explain whether the risk has changed. The colour coding, again, is consistent with the table that we saw in that matrix of how we've scored them. And you'll see some of the risks have stayed the same. We've merged one risk because there was inflation and cost of living was becoming very similar in terms of its nature and actions that we're taking to address it to economic environment. So those 2 have been combined and we've kept the highest score. And then there's been some reductions across some of the other risks as well. If we go then on to section 5, this is when we're actually providing the committee in the report with some detail of what those risks are. I'll take you through them now, give you a high-level overview of what those risks are, and I welcome any questions at the end if you wish some further detail on them. So the first risk here, this is a cyber attack. Its impact is 4 because it's pretty catastrophic if it happens. Likelihood is somewhere between 3 and 4, but we've gone prudently for a 4 score. We're saying it's 4 because we have seen instances of this happen at other authorities in the past, and it is really debilitating. Put my teeth back in.
What you said.
What he said. Debilitating. I'm not going to try that for a 3rd time. Someone else say it for me. That one. If it does happen to an authority, we have got, we are exposed to that risk, and there was a briefing that was brought to this committee in private session of the last meeting, because what we don't want to be telling you in public session are all the actions that we're taking to mitigate that risk, because effectively that would be playing into the hands of anyone that would want to undertake a cyber attack on the council. Moving on to the next risk, limited resources. This is one that's been on the agenda for and on our risk register for quite some time. It's talking about the financial landscape of local government per se and of the authority. It's one of the risks as it sets out in the report, that if it were to happen, the council would lose control of its own destiny. And what I mean by that, when we were looking at the training, these authorities that have become bankrupt, they've run out of cash. In these instances, central government comes in. They send in, as I was referring to, Max Caller, a commissioner, some of his nature and ilk will come in and effectively run the authority. Control is not just lost by officers, but by members as well. Again, in the body of the report, the text sets out the actions that we take to try and address that in terms of the budget setting process that we have, the budget monitoring reports that we produce for members and for management to try and address any variances to our budget at the earliest possible opportunity. But some of these things are just inherent to local government now, and to an extent are largely out of our control. Without becoming too negative, I referred to in the training, we are seeing an increase in number of authorities that are facing this statutory Section 114 notice, which is a notification that is given when authority runs out of cash. We saw it in the news only, I think, last week, that Kent have given warning that they are only within 2 years maximum under current projections of being in that position. And without any sort of political or other bias, I'm just saying Kent is a well-run authority from a financial management perspective. We're not talking about some of the failings that were presented in the slide otherwise. This is just an example of the pressures that local government is facing in terms of demand to place on the services and the resources that are available to address those pressures. Economic environment, again, this is a higher scoring risk. It's been merged with the supply chain risk that was on there previously because the risks have merged in nature and in effect. This may have updated, I'm not sure if we've had the latest figures for July actually. 8.7 I think is still the current figure, which is stubbornly high, and it's having an impact across all of our budgets in terms of the cost of things just becoming more expensive, but fundamentally also on our residents and what that means for us in terms of the services that we have to provide to our residents and the cost of those. Homelessness is the following the risk that follows on from this, and this is our big financial pressure for us as an authority. It's the one that we have less scope to control. It's a demand-led pressure. If people present themselves to the council and they meet the criteria of being statutory homeless, we have to provide that service to them regardless of funding that we have available to us. So that is why it's manifesting as a fundamentally a very high financial risk, but also service delivery and strategic risk in terms of the capacity that we've got to do that, and also our objectives as the council is to ensure that people have affordable homes. So that's why that is one of the highest scoring risks. Birth 4.5 is still on the agenda in terms of the risk scoring because the project is still to be completed. Do have the Director of Environment, who's the risk owner here, Mike Humber, who will be better placed than me to answer any questions on that if members so wish to do so. Then the Environment Act, again, Mike is the lead for this and may be able to say a little bit more about this as an emerging sort of position in terms of the Environment Act. We're expecting the extended producer responsibility to be coming in sometime soon, though there is some, there's been some speculation in the local government press that that may be deferred, and if that is the case, the risk may be reduced in terms of its likelihood. Change of EPC requirements. This affects our landlord function because we have a responsibility to make sure our properties have effective and efficient energy ratings, and those regulations are going to become tougher and tougher over the future. There is a planned timetable for it. I don't think we've got it specified in here. At the moment, they need to be E, but I think by the end of the decade, we're looking at a C rating. And climate change, we've got Councillor Rob Yates here with us, who declared the climate change emergency back in 2019, I believe, and we've committed ourselves to be carbon neutral by the end of the decade. We're in the process of setting the 24-25 budget next year. We're halfway through that time frame. There's a lot of work to be done still, and we're very much so reliant on central government providing the funding for us to implement this, because this is incredibly expensive to do and is not going to be achievable within the confines and the envelope of the funding that we've got just for ourselves. Reducing risks, I won't talk...
Chris,
sorry.
Apologies, I may have missed it. Did you skip over homelessness in verse 4 and 5?
No, homelessness, sorry, I kind of combined that with the financial resilience, financial resources risk. Homelessness is, the numbers are high. I can't remember the exact figure. They are not...
1,604 people in need of housing.
Yeah, yes, in terms of the number of homes that we've got in, it's north of 200. It's really, really expensive for us, but that's me looking at it from a Section 151 officer's perspective in terms of budgetary impact. putting that hard-nosed financial side, there's people's lives involved here in terms of the impact that has on them, their children's schooling, their ability to access work and school. It really is a fundamental issue that's affecting not just Thanet. It's a nationwide issue. In terms of Birth 45, sorry, I did touch on that very lightly, just referring to the fact that we've got Mike Humber, the director, available. Can bring Mike in now if you wish so, Chair.
Hi, thank you. Yes, so the Birth 45 project is on the risk register, and that's mainly around the delay in the project and around the financial risk presented. In July 2021, the budget was increased. The programme of the work has been sort of changed and quite, I think, more than 20 months delayed, and that was around the need for an environmental impact assessment, which was needed to inform the planning prior approval and the marine licence. In the end, the majority of the work took place over last summer, and it was substantially complete by September last year, leaving some main part of the work that was left was electrical work, which is going on now and is due for completion the first week in August. The berth hasn't been handed over to the operator, to Brett Aggregates, yet, but it will be very shortly as soon as that electrical work is completed, and then Brett's will have the ability to use the berth and to do what they need to do, which will be to put a conveyor on the berth so that they can import aggregate via the berth. I think the outstanding issue is financial risk, and there is a live claim with the contractor under the contract, and that claim is about that the contractor was awarded the contract before we, through the marine licence, constrained the project period, the construction period, and the claim is around how the contractor had to resource that. It's still live, it's not completed yet, so I haven't got figures to share, but that as well, we're hoping to be in a position where that is finalised by around the end of August time. So we should be in a position to report on that then.
Thank you very much, Mike. Apologies, Chris, do you want to continue with reducing risks?
Thank you. Firstly, I need to apologise to the committee and also to Matt. I misspoke. I've had a nudge from, not from Matt, but from someone else. Matt's not our financial service manager. He's our head of finance following his promotion, so I misspoke.
Congratulations, Matt.
Does it say financial services manager there, does it? Head of finance, there you go. You knew, I didn't. Yeah, amateur. Reducing risks. This is the good news story as part of this agenda item. I remember back to a committee meeting, not in the too distant past. Councillor Garner asked me, when are we ever going to see something on this agenda with the risks reducing? Because it was a series of papers coming forward with the risks at a very high level. We've seen political stewardship that has reduced significantly, given the fact that now we've got overall control. It was a high risk previously because we had a change of leadership 3 times in about 18 months, which obviously is difficult then for the council to implement everything it wants to do in its corporate plan. Governance, the risk has reduced as we've made good progress with implementing the recommendations of the independent monitoring officer and Grant Thornton's statutory recommendations. What I want to stress, though, is we're not taking our eye off the ball here. We're certainly not resting on our laurels. We know the job's not complete in terms of improving the governance arrangements at the authority, and we will continue to strive to do to get the desired outcomes. And moving on to the next one, coronavirus. I'm sure the committee will share my sentence when I say that we hope that stays at a low likelihood for the foreseeable future. Then finally, the last one is on Manson Road Depot. Again, my colleagues Mike Humber and Matt Sanham may be better placed to speak on this, but the final paragraph just talks about secondary EA visit where they came, and they were really pleased with the progress that was made at Manston Depot in improving the arrangements that we've got there, as it says, recognition in terms of the positive steps that we've taken. That's all that I've got. In terms of the committee's role here, asked to sort of note and I think approve the review of the corporate risks. Happy to take any questions and any further comments that the committee may wish to make.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Yates, you've got 3 minutes under 20.1.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to make my own like high-level view on this corporate risk register and just highlight that the economic environment has now moved up to the highest risk level, extreme risk, and I think we all as councillors feel that on the streets and with the cost of living crisis. And just highlight, it's not quite mentioned here that it's referred to under limited resources, that the council is more reliant on locally raised funds. And it mentions the fact there is a Star Chamber budget process underway. I'd just like to add that within that process, we're not just looking at how we can make savings, we're also asking officers how we can bring in additional income. So we are investigating all options for that, because it is something that we need to react to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Yates. Do any members have any questions? I have quite a few, but I will let others go first because I can go on. Councillor Garner.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for that clear and concise explanation of the risk factor. Yeah, I do want to highlight a couple of things. Where we've got a total risk, it sort of alludes to what you said about political stewardship, and I've raised that a couple of times before. So where we've got just the top one, cyber attack, we're saying the score is 16. Now, it can't be any higher than 16. That is, so we're at a worst case scenario. We've got a potentially catastrophic risk and a likelihood very high that it's happening. So we should be focusing very carefully on getting that reduced. So I just want to highlight, if we're looking at this, say in 3 months or in 6 months, and it's still 16, then that's something we should be really extremely concerned about. So I'm just seeking assurances that we are taking action, either ourselves, to get that reduced ASAP, or at least we work, I mean, if it's similar in other councils, which I assume it is, we're working with those other councils across East Kent to lobby as hard as possible, government and maybe county council, to give us the help that we require, and finances likely, to get that number down, or else we're opening ourselves up to something catastrophic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. Chris, did you want to respond?
Lots of good points you've raised there, Councillor Garner. If I try and take a few of those in turn. Firstly, so the committee, as I said, was briefed in private session back in the previous meeting in March. Happy to, if the committee are minded to do so, to bring Dan Evans, the head of ICT across the East Kent Partnership, back in to give an update on where we are with that, if the committee would wish so. In terms of working with East Kent colleagues, members may or may not be aware, so we used to have a shared service for ICT across 3 councils in East Kent, ourselves, Dover and Canterbury. The decision was taken to disband that shared service and disaggregate it. That's a live project that's happening at the moment. Staff have all moved back in-house, but there's lots to be done, particularly in terms of disaggregating infrastructures that the councils rely on. What we have kept together is the security team, because we're aware that is a high priority for us, and we did not want to create turbulence in that area until the other parts of the service had embedded into the new council's in-house teams. Dan Evans is currently producing a paper that will go to the East Kent Chief Executive to set out how we continue to appropriately resource and address the security functions of ICT across the partnership, and that will be considered in due course as to how best that's served and provided. I haven't got the answer to that yet. I've not seen Dan's paper. But I think it, as you say, it is a really high scoring, serious risk for us. As I said in my introduction, it can cripple authorities, a cyber attack, and it can leave us unable to provide services to our residents for a prolonged period of time. Without doubt, the impact is most definitely scoring 4. It's one of the worst things that can happen to an authority. The likelihood is a bit more subjective. I think I said it's somewhere between a 3 and a 4, because it's impossible to predict if and when it would happen by the nature of the risk. But prudently, we've put it at the top to ensure it has got the attention. What I can't promise, and I wouldn't want to promise, is that risk is going to come down immediately, because it's such a complex risk, and no sooner as you've taken action and got ahead of these sorts of issues, then the risk develops, and the cyber security issues and threats that we face develop further, and we need to then respond to that. It's a very responsive and reactive environment, but clearly as officers we're looking to address that as soon as possible. And as I said, happy to bring back Dan Evans, who looks after it for the shared service if the committee is minded to do so.
Thank you, Chris. On that point, I'll come in just before you, Christian, on cyber. I know that we've looked at insurance. We don't believe that the market is conducive to our risk profile. I'm interested in what type of insurance you are looking for. Is this the type of insurance where assets are effectively underwritten in some sort of business interruption insurance? Or were we looking at some kind of insurance where you would get specialists to come in if you have a breach, who will advise you and help you with your data forensics and investigation? What type of insurance were we looking at there?
I don't know the details of the policy itself. I know it's bespoke cyber security. Matt may be able to come in and provide some more detail, because he's been closer to the issue than I have. What we've been told in no uncertain terms is the paper effectively has so many conditions. The policies have so many conditions attached to them that they're not worth the paper that they're written on. That their insurers will find a way to say that you have not complied with the conditions of the policy. That's the last time we looked at it. It's an expensive policy to undertake and to take out. And the decision at the time was that it wasn't best value of the authority to take that, given the cost of it and the recourse that would be provided through the policy. But Matt, have you got anything else?
No. It's effectively, as you've just said, it's being looked at in the context of best practice with other partners and what insurances are available, and is anybody tapped into something that we maybe haven't considered, and at the moment there isn't really anything available that's cost effective in this market. So we can, it's something that can be revisited, because it's obviously always changing. So I can put that down as an action.
Okay, and then I had just a question again, just sort of following on from that, around leadership engagement in cyber risk, and whether any sort of organisation-wide testing has happened. So if it's one of our highest risks, has that been discussed at a senior level and scenario planned to what the impacts would be? Obviously that wouldn't be appropriate to share with the committee, but sure, just interested in whether those discussions and testing has happened.
In terms of discussion, certainly everything that you see on the agenda goes in front of our corporate management team, and some of it clearly has more attention than others. We spend more time looking at the risk management and the internal audit reports than we do poring over the accounts, for example. So there is a lot of focus on risk management at the corporate management team. It's brought there on a quarterly basis, the same as in line with the pattern and frequency that it comes to this committee. In terms of testing, it is something that we've done in the past. Again, I wouldn't want to say the details, but a lot of it again is education that we'll put out in terms to staff. Don't click on links that look suspicious and the like. We've had issues where there's been other cyber-related frauds that could be payroll frauds, where people have got into our accounts and into our system and tried to contact HR to say that they wish to change bank details and the like. So these are common things that don't just affect local authorities. They happen across the country, and we take one of the best actions that we can take is to constantly reaffirm with staff through frequent communication action to take and fundamentally not to take. Thanks.
Apologies. Councillor Bright.
Thank you. I've got a question around the climate change question. Everything here is about emissions and going green.
Yeah.
We've just talked about one of the risks that's going down is obviously coronavirus and the fact that that's obviously less of a thing. What lessons have we learned from the future impacts of climate change? So I'll give you an example of water. So water, we currently get 1,100 millimetres of rainfall a year in the UK, but in the southeast of England that's 600 millimetres. That's less than, or it's about the same as Lebanon and less than Sydney. So we're on an aquifer. 28% of aquifers in this part of the country have more water taken out of them every year than is replaced. So we're going to have water shortages. If it carries on getting hotter, we're going to have water shortages probably sooner rather than later. So are there any lessons that can be learned from the coronavirus actions that we took that we can apply to that to bring down the long-term risk? And can we do a study on the risks incumbent in water supply?
Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I'll very briefly talk to this, but if it's okay, I'll bring in Mike Humber again as the director. Sorry, Mike. I think that there's clearly there's government inquiries in place in terms of the lessons that can be learned nationally in terms of the COVID response. One thing, without going into the details of COVID itself, in terms of being prepared, what we are spending an increasing amount of senior management time looking at is our emergency planning responses to a number of different scenarios, and how that is risk management at its most acute. If we're presented with a particular issue, how would the council respond to that? How does our business continuity plan kick in? As you were saying, if we were left as a district, as a region, without water for a period of time, what do we need to enact in our business continuity processes in order to make sure that we're still functioning as an authority and also supporting our residents? But Mike, have you got anything that you can add to that? And sorry for throwing you in on that one.
No, that's fine, Chris. I think, absolutely, it's a really valid concern, but it's a national concern, and this is something, for example, new legislation such as the Environment Act. This is about lobbying water companies to make sure that they are planning in advance so that they, are sorting out the leak crisis, where about a third of the water that's produced is wasted before it ever reaches a tap. It's about making systems better, making sure that the catchment system works more efficiently, and that we can distribute water more efficiently from one zone, one place, like you say, up in the lakes where rainfall is huge, and compared with here where it's less so. So I think this is very much a bigger national issue that needs attention. As Chris touched upon, in terms of emergency planning, we have an emergency plan. We have business continuity plans to deal with particular emergencies. We've obviously had our fair share of water, temporary water outages, where we provided assistance where we could to Southern Water. Although I have to say that that was quite a difficult time and a difficult process, and there was certainly some ways in which that could be improved. But we've always work with partner agencies in those sort of instances and try to help. We have mutual aid arrangements with other authorities as well. I think it's a very valid concern, but one that needs to be approached at a national level.
Yes, Councillor Barlow.
Thank you. Regarding the risk of cyber attack, under section 5.1 of tonight's agenda, it says that in the event of ransomware, the head of IT led a backup replacement project in partnership across the partnership, utilising £350,000 of funding from the DLUHC. Now, I'd like to ask, was that amount of money used in the full extent? Was that full money spent? And can I ask as well for a full breakdown of that expenditure, please? Thank you.
Chris.
I'm afraid I don't have the answer to that to hand, but I'm happy to provide you a written response to that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Manos.
Thank you, Chair. I was on the question of limited resources. Councillor Yates alluded to the fact that officers would be looking at ways of increasing revenue as well as looking at reducing expenditure. So I was very pleased to hear that we have a new head of property, where there's been something of a void in recent years, since I've been aware. I understand that there is a full review happening of TDC's very extensive property portfolio, and it is a portfolio that is, by any objective measure, remarkably underlet, underutilised, and arguably there has been some neglect in that area. So I just want to make sure, given the scope for increased revenue from the property portfolio, I'm actually aware of assets which are underlet to where premiums of several £100,000 are taking place in the private market on the assignments for these leases. Given that that's money that should be coming into TDC, is the property team properly supported to make sure that they can, in the vernacular, sweat these assets to ensure that we get the full value for council taxpayers in Thanet? Thank you.
Chris, would you like to respond?
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor, for your question. Matt may be able to tell me the exact figures, but it was, I would say, one of the main topical themes that went through this year's budget. So when we set this year's budget back in February, we put a lot of additional resource into the property team on the premise that that investment would lead to better returns from our portfolio and it should be self-funding across the short to medium term. Progress is being made with that, as you've rightly referred to. There are a number of properties where rent reviews were overdue, that assets hadn't been fully looked after in the way that we would want them to. So in addition to staffing, we actually put some additional money aside for repairs and maintenance of our property stock as well, to make sure that they're up to a state where we can get the best yield from them, and or alternatively dispose of them on the open market if that was the best outcome. But very much so, the team has been invested into over the last 6 months. We're still going through a process where some of those roles are being recruited to. There's been extensive use of interims in the property team, both, as you've referred to, at very much the head of property level, where this is the first permanent appointment of a head of property we've had for some time, but in the surveyor positions as well. And we're looking to get permanent additions and have a full complement of staff in that team at the soonest possible opportunity, to allow us to, as you say, sweat those assets to the maximum opportunity.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Nichols.
Yes, I think this ties in with the legal team as well, because I know for a fact that there is a lot of leases 6-7 years out of date, and when the lease is out of date, then the revenue is stepped at the original price and needs that review. So there's an awful lot of money being lost there.
Thank you, Councillor Nichols. Councillor Towning.
I just wanted to committee to know that I have requested the chair to invite the head of the Estates Department to come and actually set out her plan as to how we're going forward with the review and where the investment and how she's going to generate further income and look at all the dead wood that has existed for quite some time. And that would be very helpful for us to understand ongoing income and having a proper review on a regular basis from the property department. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Towning. And I will take that away to speak with officers. I believe some of these matters will be picked up when Christine comes on to her agenda item to talk about some of the audit covering. But Chris, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just again, Chair, I know you've set this out at the start. It's important that if we do that and we invite the Chair, that we stay focused on the processes that Andrea Plant, the head of property, is following, rather than getting stuck into which properties that she would be looking at, because that would be very much a scrutiny area for review in terms of the decisions that we'd be taking into which properties we'd be investing in. What we can do, obviously, is look at what is the process, how often are you going to be doing rent reviews, all that kind of much higher level stuff, as opposed to actually getting in, looking at specific properties per se. That would be very much a scrutiny topic.
Yeah, and I'll come to you in a second, Councillor Towning. I was just going to suggest that we may want to pick this up under agenda item 10, because it may be beneficial that our discussions follow the internal audit plan, because then you will have some sort of response from the internal auditors about what assurance they put on this. I won't cover it now, just because we need to potentially move on, and I've got a couple of questions. But did you want to come back, Councillor Towning, or are you happy with that?
No, that's fine.
Thank you very much. So I just had a few quick questions from me, and then I'll double check if anyone else. Just in terms of the report itself, I don't know if this is, I'm not certain if I'm understanding this right. Under each of the risks, you have obviously the description of the risk, the impact likelihood, whether it's current, emerging, future. Then you have a risk score. Is that a typo? Should that be the cumulative risk score, or am I missing something on that?
Good question. Yeah, we can make that clearer in future reports. That is setting out the category of risk where it's highest scoring. So, as I said, we'll take the highest scoring risk. So, for example, limited resources, we're saying that's a risk score 4 in category strategic and financial.
Okay. And then just sticking with each of these risks then, and we don't have to cover this now, I'd just be interested. Do you, when you're looking at each of the risks, do you have a target score that you track over time? And secondly, is there analysis is done about the risk treatment as to whether it's accepted, transferred, mitigated? Because I think that might be interesting context for the organisation, for the committee, because like when we were talking before around cyber, if the mitigations are prohibitively expensive and like for example insurance, we can't get the right product, it may well be that the organisation has to accept it. But from a committee perspective, I think we would be quite interested, because we're accepting risks as a council. Yep. It may well be that, and this is a good opportunity where somebody like Councillor Yates is here, that if it's a political issue as to why we can't mitigate things, it may well be that the Cabinet should be lobbying the government for investment. I'm aware, for example, over in America, with the Inflation Reduction Act, huge amounts of money has come from central government in the US to rural, local government and state government for exactly cybersecurity, because they recognise that there is a gap and that local authorities will not be able to spend it themselves. And it may well be that something similar needs to happen in the UK, but you won't get it if we don't lobby for it.
So in terms of the processes, that all happens behind the scenes. So happy to probably, Chair, for me, probably best if I have a discussion with you at our next pre-meeting, show you the process that we go through, and then we can take a decision over the level of detail that you'd like to see in future reports.
Yeah, and again, we fully understand that some of this stuff is confidential, and we don't want to become a committee that's digging into the detail. I know, for example, we've got additional risks that score below that we're starting to look at, and I think we may be stepping over the line in terms of risks that we're looking at, but I just wanted to ask those questions. And the final one, before I sort of pass over to any other members who may have questions, was just on the risk around economic environment. There is a point towards the end talking about supplier risk and some of the mitigation that the procurement team do. Could I request that for the next meeting, we just have a little bit more information as to what's been done, because there's a line there, it says, we scrutinise the rationale for supplier adoption and undertake a company credit check via credit safe. Now, those are good mitigations. I would imagine that there is more. And I certainly know from other public sector organisations the impact of supplier liquidation or a supplier having a cyber risk, for example, and then that being transferred up has a sort of double whammy effect. I'd be interested just to see if there's any more information around that. If it is commercially sensitive or confidential, that's fine. But if we could have a little bit more information for the next meeting, I think that would be helpful.
Not a problem at all. If I'm happy to give a very brief verbal update if you wish. So, obviously, again, the risk would depend on the aspect of the risk that you're addressing. So, from a financial perspective, our terms and conditions in the majority of cases will require that the service is delivered prior to payment being made. So that mitigates the fact if a company goes into administration and becomes insolvent, that we've not lost money. Those services have already been provided. The risk, obviously, we have is service disruption. One of the benefits of having an in-house service compared to, say, neighbouring authorities who have outsourced a number of their frontline services, such as waste collection, is that is mitigated to a degree in terms of service disruption. But the checks are undertaken not just on at the point of supplier adoption. We also do reviews as well in terms of supplier performance at certain points in the contract. Matt, is there anything else you wish to add at the moment in terms of?
That's an annual rolling process in relation to sort of large contracts, and making sure that their accounts are still presented as they were when they originally had the contract let to them. So.
But again, beyond that, happy to go away, have a look, add some further detail to the report and open up further sort of scrutiny from the committee.
Yeah, I'd certainly be interested, and again, not to share the information, whether there is any analysis of single source suppliers or whether there's any analysis of suppliers whose turnover from the council is a large proportion. So I'd be interested if you do anything like that. Again, not interested in actual details of any suppliers because it's commercially sensitive, but it's just interesting in how we're mapping those supply chain risks.
Yeah, we'll set that all out. I mean, just having a little side conversation with Matt, I know that if that goes into the evaluation of the score, we have a threshold that they have to meet. If they don't meet that, I would have to sign it off in terms of we're willing to accept that risk. We wouldn't be willing to accept certain large value contracts in particular, where it is a significant proportion of that supplier's income. If we know that this is out proportion for them and they are becoming very reliant on our business, that they effectively wouldn't pass the bar.
Okay, so members, this is down for us to approve the review of corporate risks and for us to discuss annex risks. Does anybody, before we go to getting a proposal second, does anybody have any more questions? No? Can I oh yeah, Councillor Britcher.
Yes. I'd mind one in the annex bit, as mentioned, burial space. I mean, what sort of timescale are we talking on that one? Because that seems to be running out of space for that. Is that a several years thing, or is that quite imminent?
Thank you. Chris?
Chair, if I may pass over to Penny Button, our Head of Neighbourhoods who looks after bereavement services.
Sorry, I was just asking how I can answer that question. It very much depends on demand in terms of whether burials become more popular than cremation. We are working on a plan to look at extending the current site. Long term, we will have to extend further out of the current confines of the Margate Cemetery. We're not about to run out imminently, as in the next 3 months or anything like that, but we are rearranging the way that we manage the space at the moment to make extra space, because it is something that should have been looked at a long time ago.
Thank you very much, Penny. Any other? Oh, yeah, Councillor. Yeah.
Just to come back on, going back right to the beginning of what I was saying about, it was mentioned about getting the head of IT in to give us another update. Can we arrange to do that, please?
Yeah, I'll speak to officers about when it would be appropriate. The key thing I want to make sure we do, because I'm aware that we're going to have more accounts coming to this committee, and bearing in mind, I think everyone would probably, if we had a 450-page agenda plus a half-hour Q&A with an IT manager, I think we generally would be here till midnight. So we'll certainly get him in, or them in, but I think we just need to make sure we're coordinating agendas so we don't overload people. That would be the only reservation I've got. No, absolutely, yep. Okay, members, can I have a proposer and a seconder to approve the review of corporate risk and discuss, and the fact that we've discussed annex risk? Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Britcher, seconder. Councillor Donaldson. Thank you very much, members. So we're going to move on to agenda item 7, contract standing.
Ask if members agree.
Oh, apologies, yes. Do we agree? Thank you very much. I jumped ahead there. Agenda item 7, contract standing order waivers. I think I'm passing over to you, Chris, and then you're passing on to somebody else. So over to you.
You'll be pleased to hear this is the last item you'll hear from me for a little while until the last one, so you will have a break from me. I'm not going to ask her to go through the report, but we do have with us tonight Gemma Paul, who's our procurement manager, who I need to pass my thanks on, appreciation, for authoring this report and also taking a lead on the council's procurement activity. In terms of the report itself, so going back to sort of basics, we have procurement is all about buying stuff, buying things and buying services, and the processes that we follow in order to make sure we're doing that in the best possible organised way. The way that we do that is set out in the council's contract standing orders, which is part of our constitution. It's effectively the rules for the council for buying things. The report sets out there's various different processes that need to be followed depending on the nature of the contract and its value. So page 265 of your agenda pack, table 1, sets out the different processes that need to be followed when we're procuring goods, supplies and service contracts. And you can see that below £10,000, at least one quote in advance is required in order for the manager to demonstrate that they've got value for money. Between 10 and just under 100,000, at least 3 written quotes in advance are required using our council's invitation to quote process. Then between 100 and 177,897 pound and 99 pence, we have to get 3 written tenders in advance, which is a step up in terms of detailed requirements compared to the invitation to quote. Above that, there are legislative requirements that are set out in the Public Contract Regs 2015, where we have to go out via a fully compliant tender process, and we can't deviate from that because that's a legal requirement to do so, unless there is a framework in place. And a framework is a scheme where you can call contracts off it that's been provided by a separate body and it's recognised as a compliant way to procure. Table 2, very similar set of rules that set out, but in this instance we're dealing with work, so that's construction and building stuff effectively. And you'll see right at the end the limit is much higher where those public contract regs come in. That's just shy of £4.5 million. So then moving through the report a little bit, it sets out under section 4 instances where we may not follow those rules, and where we do that's called waiving contract standing orders. And there can be very valid reasons for doing that. It sets out at section 4.2 when it's deemed in the best interests of the public or the service. See the bullet points that's setting out there. It could be it could be that there's a single source supplier, or it could be that we weren't able to get hold of 3 quotes, that the market's not responded to it, and therefore waivers will be put forward in front of the procurement manager to consider. They'll challenge the officers to make sure that they can evidence that there wasn't a compliant procurement rule process that they could have gone through, and then ultimately it's presented to me to sign off as section 151. So section 6 of the report sets out the number of waivers that have been approved across different departments. This is a backwards look because obviously we're looking at 22-23 under the previous structure. Deputy Chief Executive looks quite high, but that does include housing. So that's not just all back office services, and then operational services are the majority of our frontline services. So you can see during that period there were 45 waivers approved. The vast majority of them were for relatively low value contracts, so they were below £100,000, 40 of them. There was one waiver that was rejected during that period of time. That's because they'd already undertaken the activity. They were asking for retrospective approval, and we basically said, you've already done it, we're not going to approve it. Then moving on to section 7, we've got similar information setting out the position to date in terms of the number of waivers that have been approved, and you can see again the majority of them, 2/3 of them, are for contracts that are below £100,000. Going forwards, we are looking at the moment at we're in the middle of a review of our procurement processes. We're very mindful that we've got a lot of procurement activity. We've got £100 million to spend across our capital programme in the next 4 years, and we need to make sure our procurement processes are flexible enough, allow us to do that at pace in order to deliver those schemes without jeopardising the overarching aims of our procurement rules, that is to demonstrate that we're getting value for money and that we're not exposing the council to sort of overcharging from the third or secondary parties that we're contracting with. So that's a live process at the moment, and we're hoping to be concluding that soon. Because it's part of the Constitution, that will go through the Constitutional Review Working Party, so members will have oversight of that as and when it is approved. So there are, accompanying this report, a number of annexes. So Annex or Appendix 1 sets out the sections from the contract standing orders saying when waivers may be applied. Appendix 2 is a template application form for waivers, and then you've got some more background information that detail when we have applied waivers. So this is an important part of the committee's business because we're bringing this to be transparent with members to demonstrate to you when we haven't gone out to market through a fully competitive process, because that is our default position in order to demonstrate and achieve value for money in our procurement activity. So just returning to the top, the committee's asked to note this report, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments from the committee.
Thank you, Chris. And I'll just remind members that obviously under Appendix 4 and 5 there are a number of decisions. All of those decisions will have been appropriately dealt with at the time. Members are more than welcome to ask questions, and I'm sure Chris and the team will answer those. If you're unhappy with any of those decisions, there are other committees and other ways to raise those concerns. So I just wanted to remind people of that. Does anybody wish to speak on this agenda item? Councillor Britcher.
Yes, I just want to ask, especially obviously this was all, the COVID years. Is 45 a higher than normal number of waivers over the course of a year, or is that fairly normal?
Sorry, thank you, Councillor. So if you look at, I'm just trying to get the annex number right. So it's on page 281 of the agenda pack, the Annex 3. Got some details there of the year. So 45 is the financial year 22-23. So we're probably just post-pandemic there in terms of the time frame starting in March 22. I appreciate there were still restrictions at the beginning of 2022, but I think by the time we got to April, the majority of those had passed. You can see they compared, so the orange section is for that year, and the years prior to that, 21, 22 and 2021, they were higher during the pandemic. However, that is caveated that we did relax our rules during the pandemic. So that requirement to only get one quote was increased from 10 to 25 during that period, because we knew we needed to act quickly. Although we wanted to be able to still demonstrate value for money, we were working at such pace that we needed to flex those rules. And again, that's what we're reviewing at the moment because of the capital programme. It is a time-sensitive issue for the delivery of that. In terms of whether it's high or not, it's difficult to make comparators between year and different authorities because, as I said earlier, we provide an in-house waste service, so we wouldn't be going out to contract for those things. I think it's more important when you're looking, rather than the numbers per se, for the rationale for the waiver that's been given. I don't think there's a particular number that is good or that we would be targeting, but in general they should be in it by exception unless there's a good reason to do so.
Thank you. Any other members wish to speak? Councillor Towney.
Where does the emergency powers of procurement fall into the waiver side? Because it takes me back to 2019 when we were acquiring a couple of, I'm sure Mike Humber remembers, acquiring a couple, sorry Mike, I don't mean to upset you. We were acquiring a couple of pontoons, and then suddenly ex-councillor Bayford was asked to sign off a very large sum of money to acquire these pontoons. Where does this fall into this procurement area?
Chair, if I may, and again, I'll try not to accept Mike Humber as well, because this was, I think it was an issue of debate between officers, and I don't think there was a right answer to this, and we got external legal opinion on it. So if you look at the, try and get to the right section of the report, apologies, find the right page. Sorry. So page 265, we've got our goods, supplies and services, and as I said, anything above 177,000 has to go out to a fully compliant tender, but if it's a works contract, the limit's much higher. Now we've got legal opinion that said it could be considered a works contract, and that's why it was able to be waived, and that's why we didn't have to go through a fully compliant process. Nonetheless, it was a key decision because we're talking about spending serious money, so it's not something I could just sign off, and that's why it required a cabinet decision. Mike, do you want to speak to that as well? Mike, sorry.
Yeah, just to follow on from that, there was a process that we went through with the procurement of the pontoons, and there was a proposal made for a contract under a single source supplier, but in fact in December, getting the years right, 2020 I think, the decision was made at Cabinet to go out competitively for a works contract, and in fact that's what happened, and the contractor Bam Nuttall, who owned the pontoons, priced that job and was successful through a competitive tender exercise. So in the end, actually, it was a competitive exercise that the contract was awarded upon.
My apologies, Mike. Yes, I've missed that crucial piece of information. It was a long process. Yeah.
Happy with that, Councillor Towney? Yep. Councillor Massface?
That's fine.
No, you're okay. Okay, members, we are asked to note the report. Everybody happy that we note this? Yep. Okay, moving on to agenda item 8, Samira, can you please introduce your report, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. You'll be pleased to know my report is completely non-financial. I've got no figures here at all, so you can relax and Chris can take a break as well. Right, mine is the annual governance statement, which is a statutory requirement, as Christine alluded earlier on. And it explains the process and procedure that are in place to enable the council to carry out its functions effectively. The AGS, which is known the annual governance statement, is attached as an appendix 1 to this report, which appears on your page 299 of the agenda. The AGS is a key corporate document for which the leader and the chief executives are responsible as signatory. They're also required to ensure that it reflects our governance framework in full. I'd like to highlight, I'm not going to go through the whole report because it's quite detailed, and I appreciate you've had enough of all the figures and everything, but I just want to highlight a couple of things. The first is the IMO report, which was published in 2022, which can be found on page 308 of the statement. The statement also addresses the both internal and external audits and outlines the achievements in there. The works of the various committees are also listed in there, including the GPC, which agreed and endorsed some of the key policies which were highlighted by the IMO report, which included the absence, the bullying, the disciplinary, the grievance, and performance management, which were crucial to the IMO recommendation. And then the report, the statement also addresses the Ombudsman's cases, which has been dealt by the Ombudsman. And you'll be pleased to note that we had, there were 27 complaints that were received by the Ombudsman, of which only one was upheld, and the other 12 were not upheld by the Ombudsman. Previous years we had in the region of 32 complaints, so it's gone down slightly, which is good news. Members of the DNA committee are asked to agree the AGS report statement for 2022-23. Once it's agreed, it will be shared with the external auditors and published thereafter. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Samira. Do any members have any questions or comments on this report? Okay, thank you very much. We are asked, as Samira said, to agree this. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Towning to propose. A seconder, please. Councillor Dabra. Do members agree? Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to agenda number 9, which moving on to the internal audit, who have waited patiently all evening so far as we've gone through the previous 8 agenda items. So this is agenda item 9, quarterly internal audit report, and I'm passing over to Simon Webb. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. My name is Simon Webb. I am the Deputy Head of the East Kent Audit Partnership. I work for Christine, and we provide your internal audit service. As part of that, we will provide you with assurance on the areas of risk management, corporate governance and internal control across all areas of the Council's operations. This is a standing agenda item for this committee, and you'll become used to the format of this report as the year unfolds. Basically, it provides an update on the work completed on your behalf by the East Kent Audit Partnership since the last meeting of this committee, together with performance of the East Kent Audit Partnership up to the 31st of May. If I could draw your attention to the table on page 315, that provides details of the 7 internal audits completed during this period. At the end of each audit, we conclude an opinion, an assurance level, and you can see from the table that that can be anything from substantial assurance down through reasonable, limited to no assurance. In terms of what that actually means, if I could draw your attention to page 332, that contains the definitions for each of those assurance levels. Now, they are the SIPFA definitions of the assurance levels, which will be used by internal departments across the country. As part of each audit, we also make, where appropriate, recommendations for improvement, and we classify those recommendations in terms of their priority. Now, they could be critical, high, medium, or low priority. And again, on page 332, within those definitions, we define what we mean by critical recommendations, etc. So looking at the table on page 315, across those 7 audits that we've completed, we do in fact have all 4 assurance levels. We were pleased to conclude substantial assurance in the areas of environmental protection and also sundry debtors. 4 marks to Penny's environmental health team, substantial assurance with no recommendations. That really is a very high bar to achieve. Some areas of the council's businesses we break down into constituent parts. We do quite a few environmental health audits. This one was contaminated land, air, water quality. Sundry debtors, that's managed on your behalf by Civica. Third audit in that area was refuse collection. Again, this is a very important part of the council's operations, a very visible activity in terms of the public. And we do separate audits of things like street cleansing and waste vehicle fleet management. Pleased to report reasonable assurance in the area of refuse collection. Also pleased to report reasonable assurance in the area of VAT, probably a slightly dry topic, but yeah, that was a very good, solid, reasonable assurance in that area. Absence management, the findings weren't as good, particularly as employees are the most important and largest asset within any organisation, certainly within a local authority. Now, we sometimes split assurance levels if it's appropriate to do so, and we've done that on this occasion. So we've split the assurance between management of annual leave, sickness, and flexi leave. Annual leave is fairly well controlled through the East Kent People system, and we were able to conclude reasonable assurance in that area. Sick leave, whilst the authority has fairly good policies and procedures, and I think in the training, Chris Blundell talked about having good procedures. However, if they're not followed by managers, then whilst not worthless, they're, well, it does call into a question how valid they are. And certainly with regard to sickness, there was a lack of following of procedures consistently across different departments within the council. Flexi leave, problems there really with consistency and also not having a defined system for controlling flexi leave within the council. Licensing, we split this. It was largely reasonable assurance, but there was an aspect of it which we felt was no assurance, and that was that there should be a cost-neutral exercise undertaken, and the fees and charges based upon that cost-neutral exercise, so that the authority neither makes money out of it nor loses money over roughly a 3-year period. But at the time of the audit, there was no evidence that that was being done. Car parking, again, a very important aspect of the council's operations, and indeed there is reference within the corporate plan to car parking enforcement. Unfortunately, we were only able to conclude no assurance in that area. We do have Penny with us this evening, and I'm sure that she'd be happy to help if you have questions on that area. Page 316 onwards, we provide the detail of why we've concluded the assurance levels that we have in each of those areas. So for each area, we will provide the scope of the audit and then a summary of the findings. And hopefully the bullet points take you in a logical sequence through why we have concluded that assurance opinion. It's somewhat ironic, I suppose, that all internal audit work is very fact-based and evidence-based, but it does result in an opinion, the assurance level, which obviously, as with all opinions, is subjective to a certain extent. So on the pages 316 onwards, we break down the findings for each of those 7 areas. Now, a very important part of internal audit work is follow-up. Once we've concluded an audit, as we have done with these 7 areas, we don't just take management's word for it that they're going to implement the recommendations that they've agreed with us. Approximately 3 months later, we will go back and do a follow-up audit. So if I can draw your attention to the table on page 324, that details the 5 follow-ups that we concluded during this period. In the area of Thanet Community Lotto, the original assurance level was limited, and I'm afraid to say that the assurance level after follow-up was still limited, with a significant number of recommendations still outstanding after follow-up. So you'll see from that table that for each of the 5 areas, we show the original assurance level, the revised assurance level. We tell you how many recommendations we made initially, and then how many how many are outstanding after follow-up. Any critical or high priority recommendations that are still outstanding after follow-up, they are detailed within the body of this report. They are on page 333 onwards, and that table details, as I say, critical and high priority recommendations outstanding after follow-up. Also still limited or no assurance after follow-up was museums. Again, still quite a lot of recommendations outstanding at that time. And then the final of the 5, dog warden, fly tipping and littering. Again, an important and very visible service in terms of public perception. Reasonable assurance in most of those areas, apart from litter enforcement, which is a corporate priority, but the council isn't currently undertaking any, so we could only conclude no assurance in that area. I think the council is currently in the process of putting together a new corporate plan for 2024 onwards, so obviously it will need to determine whether that remains a corporate priority. For each of those areas, we have details of why we concluded they were still limited or no assurance, and there are also management written responses for those areas. On page 327, we detail current work in progress. So they're audits that we are currently undertaking that will come to future meetings of this committee. One that I would particularly draw your attention to, and it's one of the most important pieces of work we will do this year, is cybersecurity. It's obviously been discussed already as part of the risk management item on the agenda this evening, and it's quite right and proper that there is a direct synergy between the risks faced by the council and the work of internal audit. So that is currently a work in progress. I don't think I can promise that you'll see the results in September. I think it will probably be the November-December cycle of this committee that we will bring it to. Possibly, Chair, you might think that once that report comes to this committee, that might be an appropriate time to invite Dan Evans back to provide an update, depending on the findings. External funding protocol, garden waste, all of those audits are currently in progress, and they will come to September and December meetings. In terms of the appendices to the report, one of the most important ones is Appendix 1, which starts on page 329. Now that shows the agreed 23-24 audit plan for the council. That was agreed by this committee back in March. We do review all areas of the council's activities, typically over a 4 to 5 year cycle, but some areas get audited a lot more frequently than that because they're high risk, high profile, corporate priorities, etc. So you'll see the plan broken down between financial audits, housing audits, etc. The original number of plan days that were approved back in March, the total size of the plan is 348 days. The revised budget, if it's changed this early in the year, we don't expect to see too much change, but the plan will change as risks change through the course of the year. We then show you the total amount of time that we've spent against each audit. We've taken it up to the 31st of May, and then the status and assurance level. So, for example, some of those audits are currently work in progress. Others, we've indicated what quarter they will be undertaken in, and there's a few starting to be finalised. As at 31st of May, we had completed 17% of the agreed number of days. We can update that at 30th of June, that was up to 23%, so very much on target for a very healthy plan completion by 31st of March next year. Page 331, that shows the plan for East Kent Services and Civica. That used to be a much bigger plan incorporating HR, ICT, etc. As those services have come back in-house, they've been incorporated into the main Thanet plan. There also used to be a separate East Kent housing plan, which we audited. Again, once that came back in-house, those days were incorporated into the main Thanet plan. EK Services now is predominantly benefits, council tax, NNDR, sundry debtors and customer services. Appendix 2, the definitions I've already covered. That's on page 332. As is also the case with the recommendations outstanding after follow-up. The final appendix to talk to is a balanced scorecard of key performance indicators for the East Kent Audit Partnership itself. That is on page 338. We break it down into 4 different perspectives: an internal processes, financial, customer perspective, and also learning and innovation. A couple of the key performance indicators I already mentioned, which are plan completion, which this is at 30th of June, so it was 23% for Thanet. Cost per audit day, we calculate that once a year. You will see in the next agenda item, which is the annual audit plan, the cost for 22-23, and the budget of £403 for 23-24. Obviously, customer feedback is important. We do issue a questionnaire at the end of each audit to ask customers what they think. We don't get as many back as we would like, but we do get high levels of satisfaction, particularly considering that the auditee knows what the assurance level is before they complete the questionnaire. Obviously, it's also very important that not only are we reasonably cost effective, deliver the audit plan and achieve customer satisfaction, it's also important that we're doing it with staff who are qualified. And we do have a very good qualification base within the East Kent Audit Partnership. Christine and I, as an example, are chartered internal auditors with the Institute of Internal Audit. And we also do make sure that staff do undertake relevant technical training and meet their formal CPD requirements post-qualification. Hopefully that provides you with a good summary of the quarterly update report for this period. Happy to take any questions that members may have, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. That was a very comprehensive overview. Just before I open up to questions, there's a couple of points I just wanted to make. Councillor Garner, bearing in mind there's going to be an internal audit on cybersecurity that's going to come back, I think you said, Simon, November. That may be the time that we ask the relevant officer to come to the meeting. So we will have some detail of assurances of the processes, and then we can talk more around the risk side as well. So there might be a bit of a double whammy there if you're happy with that.
I'm happy with that, thank you.
And members sort of agree that that might be a good approach. We'll obviously have to check diaries and stuff, but we'll have that as a draft plan. Second thing to say, and I think this has happened in the past where recommendations or audits have taken place and have come back to the committee a couple of times and not been implemented. I think we have a role, members, in supporting internal audit here. If we are seeing matters coming back with limited or no assurance and action not happening, I do think we have a responsibility to flag that up to Cabinet. Our recommendations go direct to Cabinet. We have Councillor Yates here as well. I'm not enough over the detail for this committee meeting to know whether any of the matters that Simon sort of outlined, where there's still, like with the lotto, issues that haven't been raised, but I will certainly keeping an eye on behalf of the committee to make sure that any recommendations that you make that are being repeated time and time, that we may well pick up and refer that to Cabinet. I've got one question. I hope you were a quick one, Simon. On your audit of licensing, you referenced, and you said it in your section when you introduced it, around the cost neutral exercise for fees. Now, I was just interested because is that just a licensing thing? Because obviously, as discussions happened around the risk register, Councillor Yates himself said the council is very reliant on fees and charges for our income, and there is obviously high inflation at the moment. I think the last figures were 7.9%. Is that across the board on other fees, or is that literally just for licensing that it has to be done on a cost neutral basis and not related to blanket increases?
Thank you, Chair. From memory, that also applies to land charges and building control. Matt's nodding. I don't know if there's any other areas apart from those three.
there are restrictions in relation to parking. We can't just have a blanket approach to fee increases on parking. It has to be driven by effectively a strategy to reduce the number of cars and where they are and manage traffic rather than just a blanket increase. So there are other restrictions. These tend to be done as a matter of course, these reviews. We don't refund, obviously, if you set the fees, for example, licensing, and you set it in year one on a break-even basis, there's an expectation over that 3 years that you would continue to manage it, and every year drops out, a new one drops in, and you do another review. So I don't think necessarily licensing as an example is a massive issue. I know a member of my team did look at it, has looked at it previously with regards to this break-even position, but the high inflation rates and various other different bits and pieces do have an impact, and it's a changeable environment. So.
Thank you. Councillor Manners.
Thank you, Simon. That was actually a really good insight into how the council's performing. The question I have is regarding parking. The scope of your audit was that presumably is just the existing status quo with existing street infrastructure and existing parking spaces. Did it look at? I mean, the reason I'm asking the question is the chaos that we have in my area, in Botany Bay and Palm Bay, with day trip visitors who are parking on being funneled into crowded residential streets, where no revenue is being generated whatsoever from their visit to our coastline. Was that taken into consideration with your audit, or was it based solely on the existing infrastructure? Because I think most residents would be concerned to know what is being done. Is there a plan to actually address the issue of day trippers parking? Thanks.
Thank you. It was based on the existing infrastructure. I don't know if Penny would like to speak about the policy in those particular areas.
I'm happy to just do a summary of the situation we found ourselves in to how we got to no assurance, which is what I prepared for this evening, if you're happy for me to do that, Chair. Obviously, we as a team are extremely disappointed to receive no assurance in our parking audit, but it's understandable given the situation that our team has been in the last year, or last 2 years, to be perfectly honest. We've had no team managers in place due to absence and an inability to backfill despite consistent efforts. Maternity cover in parking is not something that happens very often and is not something that we manage to do. Coupled with that, we have a completely new team. So we were dealing with a new team of officers in our administrative side of things who didn't have that background and knowledge for some of the questions that we were asked in our audit. One of the things that did come out from the audit is how extremely good our written procedures were for our everyday work. And that is reflected in the comments that were made. Unfortunately, it's not the case for the management side of the business, and that's where things have slipped through the cracks. So in some areas, we were undertaking checks and balances, but we weren't able to demonstrate to the auditor with written evidence of how we'd done those things because we didn't have that in place. So what the team have done now is we actually have a full management team in place. They've worked through some of the issues highlighted in the report. We are establishing a management procedure so that if we find ourselves in a situation where we have long-term absences again, we are able to pick that work up without anything falling. Whilst this isn't an audit outcome that any of us ever want, we are actually quite grateful for the recommendations because we've been able to take them and then actively look at ways of continuing to improve the service that we're providing. So in terms of the situation we find ourselves in now is very different to the one that we had in the audit a few months ago, and hopefully will be very different to the one when you come back to see us in the autumn.
Councillor Manners, do you have any follow-up?
I think I'd just like to say that I think parking needs to be, we do need a thorough review of parking in Thanet, coming back to the risk factors that we spoke about earlier, with revenue being a major source of of focus rather than just expenses. I think parking revenue should be a greater focus for us for, when we look at the visitor economy. That was, and hopefully that will be looked at some point with the parking review. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do any other members have any questions? Yes, Councillor Munns.
Hi, it says at the moment there's 5 CEOs. I guess they're enforcement officers. Is that the current? Is it currently 5, or is it? It said it should be up to 11. How are we going to get to 11?
So we're currently on 5, I believe. Getting to 11 is extremely difficult. We've had adverts out all of this year and all of last year. We're just difficult. It's difficult to recruit people on that area. We have some, how do I put this? Some proposals in the pipeline of how we might be able to encourage people to come in, but I have to get them through the finance system first. Can I come back on? Yeah, can I come back
apologies,
on
of course,
the other questions? Okay. So we can't just charge what we like for parking, unfortunately. It has to sit within the legislation, and I'm looking at Matt for this because he knows way more than I do about how we calculate our fees and charges for that. We can't use it as a revenue stream, and I think I need to make that very clear tonight. We cannot use parking as a revenue stream. We have got the strategy that's going out for tender at the moment, and we are hoping to bring that back to Cabinet in January. And that will be a review of where our car parks are, where our parking is, and so hopefully that will provide us with the strategy we need to tackle some of the areas where we know we have problems. It will also enable us to see where our need is for coastal parking and town centre parking, as well as future-proof ourselves. That's my ideology from this review. Fingers crossed it will come out that way.
Thank you, Penny. Councillor Bright.
Yeah, I was interested to hear Simon's point. Thank you again, Simon. On the around absence, you've just mentioned absence. Around the pockets of good practice that you have identified. I'm assuming these pockets of good practices are shared across the organisation. So that's all clarified exactly where they are and rolled out.
Yes, so in terms of our day-to-day manual, procedure manual, we've actually shared that following this audit with some of my other teams, which they're taking on board in some of the ways that they work on daily tasks and things. So yes, it's shared.
Great, thank you.
And we use our managers forum for that as well.
Okay, members, if there's no other points, we are asked on here to receive the report and to agree the changes to the 2023-24 internal audit plan resulting from changes in perceived risk detailed at point 5 of Annex 1 of the attached report. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Yep, Councillor Garner proposing, Councillor Britcher seconding. Is that agreed, members? Yes. Agreed. Okay, moving on to agenda item 10, internal audit annual report 2022-23. Christine, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, if I could direct you, please, to page 343. This sets out the purpose of this report. So, as alluded to in the training session earlier, the previous 4 meetings of the committee are summarised at the year end, and to take that higher helicopter view of what all this means and why all these individual pieces of work add up to something. Again, mentioning our professional standards, we have to provide an opinion on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's internal control environment, present a summary of the work undertaken to form that opinion, draw attention to any issues that we judge particularly relevant to the preparing of the annual governance statement. In an ideal world, that item would follow this, but we've heard that already this evening. Compare the actual audit activity with that which was planned, what we promised you last March on why that changed, and summarise the performance of the internal audit against its criteria, and to comment on the compliance with our public sector internal audit standards and the results of our quality assurance. And very, very importantly, as drawn attention to in the training, to confirm that we have acted without influence or been restricted in our carrying out of our responsibilities. So the report, members, is really in two parts. Clearly, we need to address how internal audit has performed, and those metrics are set out on paragraphs 3.1 to 3.7 of the report, page 346. And they are important metrics, as Simon's just taken you through the balance scorecard in the previous item. I won't go into great detail, but that dashboard is summarised for the year in Appendix 4 for you. Arguably, the more important part of the report is really so what in terms of measuring management's response to the individual findings in those pieces of work that we've undertaken. And if I could take you then to page 347 of the report, paragraph 4, that starts to set out the overview. And we've provided 3 views of the summary of the work. In paragraph 4.1, we show a summary of the risks that we've identified. So all of those individual recommendations that we've raised in the action plans of all the work that was concluded. And this is summarised and split out between the critical, the high, the medium and the low priority risks in those tables. The second view in 4.2 is the assurances that we've given. As Simon has highlighted, at the conclusion of each piece of work, we identify an individual assurance level. And these reflect, where we have split opinions, these reflect the lower one in this summary here. And taken together, I think it's really important to see there's been a change in the trend for the year looking back. The 42% of the reviews were in the substantial or reasonable assurance arena, and there was an unprecedented number of no and lower assurance levels in that year. Also, it's important, throughout this report, I should have highlighted earlier, as Thanet District Council is the host for East Kent services, majority of which, as Simon's already explained, is the work undertaken by Civica for you. The results of our work for East Kent services are also shown in each of these, and the appendices include the East Kent services annual report. And there are no areas of concern for me to highlight to the committee in those reports. So the final view, and we will come back to this each time, is the so what in terms of the results of our follow-up. And I apologise for the layout of the table there. When it left me, those words weren't quite split, but no assurance, limited, reasonable, they've all been squished. So the conclusion of the follow-up, and I think this is a point also I'd like to just sort of mention, as the Chair has already mentioned, when we have done, the East Kent Audit Partnership will undertake one follow-up for the committee, for the council, and at the point when they haven't progressed or there are critical or high recommendations, as there was in the item before, this is the point at which we're escalating them to committee, and it is where we're flagging, this is the areas you might like to ask for a future progress report on. So you've picked that up, which is really, really essential. So in this table, we can see that there were 4 areas after follow-up that had no or limited assurance. And I can update the committee with the table there. The street cleansing, we actually were commissioned then to undertake a further follow-up. And that was reported to our March meeting, where the opinion was changed to limited. And we had the service manager responsible gave a great detailed update on what had happened and what was yet to happen in those areas. And similarly for commercial let properties and concessions, we've already talked about rents, leases this evening. We also had a detailed presentation by the asset manager at the March, I think it was March meeting, where he presented again what the plan is, how it's being addressed, and what resources it required to deliver. So there were 2 areas, and as you go through the report, you'll see that the the Equality and Diversity and the Thanet Community Lotto were at limited, and consequently they may be areas that you would ask for a further progress report during the year, or at least to understand whether those critical and high risk recommendations have been implemented. Moving through the report, I think it's probably just useful to present page 355, Appendix 2, and Simon explained how that table works, and clearly there were changes to the plan during the year, and this summarises the original days, the revised days, and the actual at the year-end position. So all of those individual pieces of work is what leads us to the opinion. In the training, I think I alluded to us trying to align our opinion alongside the changes with Grant Thornton's external audit opinion and their value for money opinion, where they provide 3 views and they're looking at corporate governance, risk management, internal control separately. So we've also, last year was the first year that we undertook to do that. It's kind of work in progress, but we have done that again. And paragraph 5.1, it's not an opinion that I would have been expecting to write or wanted to write in this year. It's formed from, as we've said, factual, evidence-based individual pieces of work, but at the end of the day, it's a subjective view. But until some of these areas start to embed, and we can say they're consistently, effectively applied, I can only conclude that there is lower confidence in these areas. Similarly, with internal control, as highlighted just recently in the table summarising the opinions, there have been a higher number of the lower level of opinions in the individual pieces of work, and there are 10 reviews that we are yet to follow up due to the timing of these that are listed in the table in 5.2, and they're likely due date for those follow-ups to have been undertaken. They will be presented to a future meeting of the committee, and similarly, if the committee were concerned over any progress in those areas, they would be ones that you might like to ask for further follow-up or further updates. Again, it's kind of unprecedented, and you will have read the report, so I won't go through in further detail, other than to say in 5.3 we are confident, and you will see this, the risk register, the risk process, the processes are sound and effective. We're due to review that as an internal audit, I believe next year or the year after, but we can conclude that the risk management processes are effective and working. Given that it is a backward look, this is a report that is only up to the 31st of March, and given the nature of the conclusion and the opinion, when it was presented to management team, it was felt appropriate for management to be able to provide a response to the report, and that is set out in paragraph 6, with the view to contextualise some of those things and the reasons behind why internal audit have found what we have found during the year, and also I think to reaffirm the commitment that it is in the final paragraph there in terms of presenting a more positive opinion by the time we have this meeting this time next year, members. I think in terms of presentation, that's probably enough from me. Obviously, very happy to take any questions, or if the Section 151 officer needs to come in as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Chris, did you want to come in and add anything?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Christine. As Christine set out, at Section 6 reports, the management response to it, it's been well reported that the council's had issues with its corporate governance, particularly around the disciplinary and grievance arena of the corporate management team, and we've made good progress with that. And implementing the recommendations of the independent monitoring officer and the external auditor's statutory recommendations. However, nonetheless, we had a big turnover in senior management staff, and that put a real strain on the corporate management team ability to address some of the recommendations that were put in place. Pretty much the whole, well, not pretty much, the whole top tier of the organisation's management team did leave in a very short space of time and was replaced, and we're still in the process of recruiting to the last couple of posts within our corporate management team. I think there's only 2 left that we need to fill across directors and heads of service. Once we've done that, well, we've already made progress, and once we've got that complete, we'll be much better resourced and in a position to actually address these. And as Christine said, we are fully committed to implementing these recommendations. As Penny Button said, they are very much welcomed. Officers want to have clean audit reports, but when they don't come forward, we take those recommendations, and when we accept them, we want clearly to implement them as soon as possible. But there have been some things that have been difficult to do. Thanet Lottery, taking that as an example, is just one where there's not been the resources to do it. It's not something that's high up on our corporate plan in terms of a priority, and we've just not had the bandwidth or capacity or space within the corporate management team to address those, given the turnover in staff in key positions.
Thank you very much. Reflecting that, Chris, and bearing in mind a lot of the committee are new, including myself, to this, if we were to ask for the lotto, and I think equality and diversity were the two, was it, that you mentioned, Christine, if we did ask for them to be brought back with a further report, what would that look like? Because bearing in mind what you said about the prioritisation on this, there's a balance that we want to strike here between doing our job of making sure that recommendations from the internal auditors are reflected, but we've also not creating additional work for officers on things that may not be a priority. I think looking at the committee, I think we would want to make sure that this isn't lost, but reflecting that fact. So what would that process look like?
In terms of equality, diversity, inclusion, I wouldn't want to diminish that in any shape or form. That is an important priority for us. We've been discussing that at corporate management team and where that policy sits, both internally within our own staff cohort and in terms of how we engage with our community and wider stakeholders. I feel like we're making progress with that, and we'd be in a position to report back to the committee, perhaps not September, but certainly November. I need to speak to Christine around programming of that work. I'd be concerned, speaking candidly and just frankly, if we programmed in a lottery one, how much progress would be made in the immediate term, but certainly it's something that needs addressing. And again, I'd need to speak to colleagues in the corporate management team and also to Christine Parker to understand when an appropriate and optimum time would be to plan a review of that piece of work.
Okay, thank you. Because I guess as an audit committee, we have two levers here. The first lever is to ask you to come back and give us a monitoring report. Second one is to refer this up. Absolutely. I certainly don't feel, unless any members have any strong views, that we're at that point of referring up. But I think it would be good if in November we could receive even a status report on both of them, even if that's to say on the lotto side, nothing has happened. However, we have had discussions and it looks like it'll be picked up in 2024. Are members broadly happy with that? Yeah, do you want to say any more, Chris?
Yes, I mean, November, I'm happy to do so. I mean, without putting Samira and any pressure here as our interim monitoring officer. Samira, you're due to be with us till November time, so I don't want to put any pressure on. I don't know if you will be here when we have the committee, but I don't want to put too much pressure on Samira to deliver that. And we've got a new permanent monitoring officer joining us at the end of October, so there may be some. We can provide a statement. I just don't know how, again, because of the change in staffing, how much progress will be made. But I agree. I think reporting up to Cabinet at this moment in time would be premature, and I welcome the opportunity to bring an update report to the committee.
Well, can I suggest then, if there is substantial updates that this is included on the agenda, if there are only informal updates, that before around that time members are all emailed with an update. So there is no point in having an agenda item if there's not a lot to discuss, but I think we'd all want to make sure that this is kept on the radar. So, okay. There was also another issue, Christine, that Councillor Towning raised earlier around property rents and use of assets. Now, I sort of shoved this later in the agenda because I felt from looking at some of the work that you've done in the last year of looking at some of these areas, would it be, and again, the last committee meeting I think approved next year's programme, are you, as part of the next 12 months worth of work, anticipating any audits around this area that we could potentially tie that discussion into?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and it's an interesting example of how we're tolerating the risks until such time as you have news that you can be assured that everything's working, and it's sometimes that lag can be longer. Well, unfortunately, you've lost the continuity in the sense that we did the audit. In response to the audit, the manager came forward at the point where it was still limited after follow-up and gave that presentation. I think it was the last meeting, was it March? I'll check when that was, but it was the detailed presentation was addressing all of the areas that we'd raised in the audit, and it went more broader to respond to a bigger asset management plan and what the council's doing, which others colleagues can probably give you a better update. So we aren't planning to do anything more in the next, but you as a committee, I feel, we were talking about the recommendations tracker, weren't we, at the briefing, in terms of you need to understand how many critical or high risks have we escalated. I mean, during the year, there were 35, and you probably as a committee want to know, well, how many of those have been since implemented, and that's the kind of information I think is useful to bring back. There's a piece of work to be done about who is doing those reviews of effectively risks that have been escalated that are in stasis until you close them down as a committee. So I think that that's a useful way to respond to those. But in terms of us telling you what we're already telling you, you're not benefiting. We're all about trying to add value. As we said, we don't have enough resources to audit everything every year. So we're trying to go into fresh areas rather than come back and keep reviewing what we've already told you to do, if that makes sense as well.
So, Councillor Towning, I think there's clearly an issue that's been flagged up there. I'm not 100% certain whether asking the officer to come and ask questions, because if we're focusing on process, we've already had a audit that's flagged up the issues and management is dealing with them. Some of the issues you're raising are probably much better dealt with either at Cabinet or via overview and scrutiny. I will, however, because I'm not familiar enough with the issue, if you're happy, I will take that as an action away with Chris to speak about that and work out whether that could be factored into a future agenda item or whether it's better dealt with elsewhere. Do you want to come in, Councillor Towning?
Yeah, thank you for that. I fully agree that asking Christine and Simon to look at the portfolio and giving us a good insight to the critical or the overall view as to where we stand with regards to exposure. But what I'm trying to understand is that we did have Mark Peace come here and talk to us about, with Bob Porter. We have now an opportunity where we have Andrea Plant, who has been in the Estates Department for quite a while. She is now in charge of it, and she is putting together a review of it, and maybe it would be a good idea to understand how that review is going to work and give yourselves also an understanding of how that review is going to work, to give us a clearer picture of where we're travelling, because we don't know where we're travelling and we haven't known for quite a long while. Thank you.
Are you happy that we can take that away and just come back to you with a way forwards, just because I don't think on the hoof we'd want to make a decision on that? Chris, do you want to come in at all on that just before we move on?
Yeah, thank you. Just in terms, again, context, this year's budget, we put an extra £625,000 into the property and estates team for additional staffing roles, and the intention was that would be fully funded from an increase in rental income. So before the next meeting, if I've got my committee timetable right in my head, Cabinet will have the first quarterly update on the budget monitoring position for the year in September. So there will be, we'll be able to appreciate it doesn't come to this committee, but members will start to have sight of how that is progressing. Over and above that 625 in terms of staffing establishment, we also put 800,000 into the budget as well to allow for repairs and maintenance backlog to be addressed across our portfolio. So I would just, my only concern again, I think, as I said earlier, any presentation that we get Andrea Planton to do should be focused on process and in terms of how those rent reviews will be undertaken, rather than any detailed sort of investigation or scrutiny of properties per se, which would be better served by overview and scrutiny.
I'll pick this up, Councillor Towning, and see if we can work out a way where members can get informed on this, but potentially make sure it's in the right committee. So, yeah. I've got a couple of questions before I go in. Does any member have any? Yes, Councillor Garner.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to thank Christine and the team for the report and for the work. I understand I'm sort of focusing here on section 5.1, the corporate governance section, because I'm aware, as one of the two councillors who were here over the last 4 years, I'm quite aware of the work they did to bring some of these governance issues to the fore to enable us to then go on and tackle them and get to the position we're in now. So thank you for that. And one of the items that's mentioned in there is the lack of a formal project management framework and the review that was deferred because there was the post-implementation review of Project Birth 4 and 5. So obviously we know there's a number of very significant projects going to be kicking off, if they haven't already, in various areas around Thanet, especially at the port. So I'll be keen to know when we are going to get a review of that project management process, so as we can be assured that the process we're following is going to enable the successful implementation of any of these projects. Thank you.
Christine?
Thank you, Chair. The recommendations from the piece of work that was undertaken on Birth 4.5 were broader than just that particular project. And going back to the training earlier, we were talking about the first line of defence and the second line of defence. This is the second line of defence. Where is the project management methodology, the framework, that everything else should hang off? That said, the council is clearly delivering projects. So, officers running those projects are using their own methodologies, and some of those projects are delivered very successfully. So in terms of this is probably the point I was trying to make in this the next paragraph. Operationally things are working quite well on the coalface, and officers are delivering. What has been missing when we've undertaken the reviews in terms of governance is this structure and the process of the strategies and the policies being up to date, visible, easily accessible, and those kind of observations in terms of governance. I'm due to undertake the follow-up to those recommendations. So I say, whilst they're very specific from that piece of work that was undertaken for Birth 4.5, they were more generic in terms of the things that management need to address. I don't know if Mr. Blundell wants to come in and give a progress report, because he was briefing me earlier that on what has already been undertaken, but I will be bringing the progress report back to a future committee when that's undertaken. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Christine. And if I may just say as well, thank Christine, because we have been discussions about this, and one of the things Christine spoke about, the benefits of the East Kent Audit Partnership, is that they see an insight into the operations, not just at Thanet, but across the partnership. And actually, in the discussions that Christine and I have been having, she shared the project management framework that they've got in place in Dover. That's just one that we've been looking at in terms of we're reviewing other project management frameworks that are in use at other authorities across Kent. That's been shared between myself, Mike Cumber, Bob Porter and Colin Carmichael, the Chief Executive, is leading on that project in terms of overviewing and updating our project management framework. I would expect that we will get this resolved fairly rapidly now, but there are lots of different aspects of it that come into it as well. As I referred to earlier, we're undertaking a procurement review, and that's just one part of it. Procurement is a key aspect of project management. We're also looking at the contract management side. One of the councillors on the committee referred to I think it may have been Councillor Nichols, around the leasing arrangement with the capacity and legal team. I know Samira is looking at ensuring that we've got adequate resources in place for contract management. So, sorry, that's a bit bitty and fragmented, because it touches lots of different aspects of the council. There are good examples of good practice across the organisation, and we've brought in other officers to discuss this at corporate management team, or sit outside the corporate management team, who are experts in project management, to effectively advise us and share that best practice that is happening, because we have seen a number of projects well managed. We just need to take the best parts of that from inside the council and also outside the council, and come up with something that's consistent and coherent that we can apply across the whole organisation. So, easier said than done. It's work in progress, but it's something that's right at the top of corporate management teams' to-do list and priority list at the moment.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Bright.
Yeah, I was just going to come in on the point on page 352 where Christine's report mentions that there have been occasions during the year where our work has been hampered due to difficulties in gaining responses from management. I guess obviously we all understand the importance of audit and the importance of making sure we're facilitating Christine and the team's ability to carry out their jobs. I'm making an assumption that's due to kind of capacity issues in the past, but I mean, are we putting steps in place to mitigate against that in future?
If I may. Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the management response, that is due to capacity issues, myself included in that. Christine and I have increased in part response to this, the frequency that we'll be meeting. We have regular meetings set up to discuss this, that allow me to escalate any sort of issues prior to them going to the corporate management team. So that's one of the tools that we'll be looking at doing, as well as obviously inviting Christine to our corporate management team on a quarterly basis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Christine, I had just two quick questions. I know on page 356 that the business continuity emergency management audit was deferred. Can I just confirm that's due to come back in the next year? Because obviously that's come up a couple of times in our discussion around the risks, the importance of business continuity and emergency management. I just wanted to understand whether that's been picked up soon.
Thank you. It wasn't one of the ones that was then reintroduced into the 23-24 plan based on the risk profile of it at the time, and largely in response to a lot of the COVID emergency, it was one of the areas that was pushed back because it had been operated so many times during that time. So it will be reconsidered from December onwards to whether it comes forward again to next year's plan, and if it's still an area of concern, then clearly that's partly why we also consult the committee on what's in the plan, if they've got concerns, if they feel there's gaps in the plan. But it wasn't brought from 23 into 24, sorry. Thank you.
Okay, and just out of interest, and you can maybe get the information after, you don't have it to hand, do you know what the last assurance was around business continuity emergency planning? Again, you don't have to answer now, this is a...
Thank you. I would need to check. It's at fingertip reach, but I haven't got it directly in front of me, so I can easily confirm that.
If you could just, if you get a chance to email, I'd be interested in that. And the other one, again, other members may know more about this, but it keeps popping up. East Kent opportunities. It came up at full council as well, and I guess I'm just looking for guidance from the officers on this. It's come up here as having no assurance. Is this something that the committee should be interested in following up on? Are there plans to audit this? I recognise there's commercial sensitivities there, but I want to make sure we're doing our due diligence, that this is coming up quite a few times.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It is actually, so it's a live audit at the moment. It's nearing its conclusion. It will be coming to the committee at its next meeting.
Thank you very much. Do any other members have questions or comments? Okay. Recommendation is that members note the opinion of the Head of Audit Partnership and that members receive the annual report detailing the work of the EKAP and its performance to underpin the 2022-23 opinion. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Towning has proposed, Councillor Bright has seconded. Do members agree? Agree. Right, we're nearly there, folks. Last two. Stick with us. So agenda item 11, updated. Is it RIPA policy? Yeah, okay, I like it.
Yeah, it's a RIPA policy.
Agenda item 11, updated RIPA policy 2023. Over to you, Samira.
Thank you, Chair. It's essentially the updated RIPA policy, which stands for Regulation of Investigatory Powers under the 2000 Act. Members will note that directed surveillance is defined in the section 26.2 of the RIPA. Obviously, I don't expect everybody to remember that, which is fine. It's set out under page 364 of the report. And the updated policy actually starts from page 371 of the report. Members are asked to note that it is Council policy not to exercise the available powers under the RIPA unless it's absolutely necessary. Most of the Council surveillance is overt, i.e. open, and not covert, so we don't actually do any hidden covert. However, there have been occasions in the past few years where authorization has been given for direct surveillance, but I can confirm that our record shows, which is what I have reported to the Commissioner, that there's been no covert surveillance for the year 2022 and 2023 so far. Members may recall, some of you may recall, that this policy did arrive at GNA Committee last year at this time, and it was endorsed by the committee. However, as the policy is required to be updated every year, the report before yourself is an updated version with all the updated forms for covert surveillance, which are set out in the appendix to the report, and it starts from page 400 onwards. Members are also asked to note that the Council had its last inspection by the Commissioner in April 2022, which resulted in a number of recommendations which are outlined and starts from page 365 of the report. I'm pleased to confirm, and there's a letter attached to the report from the Commissioner confirming that all the recommendations have been endorsed and been achieved by the Council, including all the training and for all the relevant officers, including the CMT members and senior officers. The Council also now have a central record for all authorisation with a timetable for destruction in line with policy, which was quite crucial and was one of the recommendations from the Commissioner. Members of the GNA Committee are asked to adopt the amended policy as set out in Appendix 1 of the report, note and sign off the IPCO, which is the Investigatory Power Commissioner Office letter. There's two letters attached. One is the original recommendation, and the second one where he signs off the recommendation. And then lastly, note the activity set out during the year, which at the moment is none. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Samira. And as has been emailed out, apologies to members that the table on pages 365 to 368 in the original agenda had some formatting issues, so you couldn't read it. Are there any comments or questions from any members on this? No? Okay. As Samira set out the recommendation, can I please have a proposer and a seconder? Please have a proposer. Councillor Britcher and a seconder. Councillor Donaldson. Are members agreed? Yeah. And here we are, final agenda item 12. Annual Treasury Management Review 2022-23. This always gets left to the end. And there are very rarely questions, so let's see if we'll follow that trend. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, and we did discuss about where we'll schedule this on the agenda in future. In addition, we are going to arrange for some training for members on Treasury management. We have external Treasury management advisors who provide advice to myself and Matt on how we manage our Treasury activities, and they'll come in and provide some face-to-face training for members to appreciate this is quite a technical subject area. Treasury management it's not about our budgets, it's not about what we're spending on services, it's all about how we manage the cash that's coming through the council every year. So as I kind of alluded to in the training, it's about 100 million that flows through our bank account every year. On top of that, we hold borrowing as well, that's in terms of debt. So I won't go through the whole report. It's been a long meeting, so I'll promise you I'll keep this as short and as snappy as possible. So just looking, trying to pull some key things out of the exec summary for a start. So you'll see CIPFA, that's the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. They've been referred to a couple of times tonight. This is their definition of treasury management on page 427. Treasury management is the management of the local authority's borrowing, investments and cash flows. It's banking, money market and capital market transactions. So borrowing, pretty self-explanatory, similar to what you would see. We borrow from other institutions. Typically we borrow from something called the Public Works Loan Board, PWLB. They're an arm of government that allow us to borrow money for them. Cash flows, that's the money that comes in and out. Banking, we bank with
NatWest.
Not Lloyds.
No, not Lloyds.
NatWest. It's been a long night. Who used to be Lloyds? Yeah, we've not. Yeah, I'll shut up. I can't even come back on that one. Money market transactions and capital market transactions, we'll cover that in the training. But if anyone's got any specific questions, I'm happy to answer those. An effective control of the risks associated with those activities. And that, again, is a theme that we've heard coming through tonight's, not only the meeting and the training, and I must say I'm very appreciative of members' time and attention at what's been a very lengthy evening, in pursuit of optimal performance consistent with those risks. So what are some of the key items coming out of that? The gross debt, also called our borrowing position, as at the end of March last year, was just shy of 20 million. So we had 20 million of debts that we'd taken on borrowing from other institutions, mainly the PWLB. We'd actually needed to borrow during that time, or the debt that we should have held was about £52 million. We'd met that shortfall through our own internal cash flows, because at the end of the year, we had £60 million. So effectively we're using that money instead of going to the bank to save it, whether that's Lloyds or NatWest. Again, there's a very lengthy report. It's quite a standard format if you were to look at this across not just TDC but any other local authority. This is a statutory report we have to produce in order to comply with regulations. It'll also, as well as coming to this meeting, it'll go to Cabinet in September and then be recommended on to Council. So members get sort of 3 bites of the cherry to ask questions and scrutinise our Treasury management activity for the last year going backwards. There's a lot of detail in the report, perhaps something that will be of interest if we go on to page 6 for the report. On page 436, you'll see that chart which has gone up and up and up and up. That's interest rates, no news to anyone, but borrowing's become a lot more expensive over the 12 months. So at the start of the financial year, borrowing rates below 1%, and now even for the council, it costs us over 4% to borrow at the end of the financial year. What we know since then, we've had further increases in the base rate subsequently. What you may be interested to see on the bottom of page 438, so reference link group, this is their forecast of where they think interest rates are going to go. Their forecast is that interest rates will start to fall, but we already know that they're higher than where they were and they're in June, and they're probably likely to go further up again. I think the current forecasts are at 6% because of where inflation has been quite so sticky. So it's really, Treasury management is a really difficult thing to get right. You can't predict really what's going to happen. Who knew what was going to happen with interest rates? All you can do is just try and take risk-informed decisions. In general, we've got a very low risk appetite in terms of our investment strategy. We stick most of our cash in money market funds, which are about as boring an investment type as you can get. Means we can get the money back, instant access. The yields are a little bit lower than if we tied it down for a year or so, but one of the benefits of us not tying our money down is that we've benefited from these instant increases in the base rate. If we've been tying our money down for 1, 2, 3 years, back a year or so ago when the rates were so low, we wouldn't have seen those increases in interest rates. That's all I'm going to say on the item because it's incredibly late and you've already had a very long agenda to get through, but I'm happy to take any questions if there are any on this item. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just add one comment. I think at times we all try and bring this agenda item forward because it does always get left at the end and it is quite important. And I will just give one sort of story from when I was on Kent County Council before. when we used to deal with Treasury, the one thing we were talking about was the fact that the Icelandic banks had collapsed and Kent County Council had all sorts of problems, and that was directly related to Treasury strategy. So it is important, because I think same reason Kent County Council, it was end of the agenda, and then suddenly you had cabinet members on TV and the world's media sort of descending on organisations that got caught out. So it's important. So we may well look at bringing this forward to early in the agenda in the future.
Chair.
Does anybody?
Sorry, Chair, if I may, just in terms of that. So this is a backwards look. The next time you'll see this will be the forwards look, and that will be setting out our strategy, which includes the types of institutions and what is called counterparties that we will invest in. And as you say, that will be the type of thing where you say, will you be willing to invest in Iceland or parts of the Middle East, or or, you know, tobacco and all those types of things. And that is where the committee has the opportunity to ask those questions.
Thank you. Councillor Manners.
Thank you. I'll be really brief, because at the risk of making myself even more unpopular. On the issue of being risk averse, great, but will any of the reserves be invested in TDC's own property assets, given that there's going to be a substantial repair bill on many of those assets, in order to provide a return, and perhaps a better return than might be available on any of the markets at the moment?
So this year we did put 800,000 into the budget. We'll review progress with that. In terms of the cash, so there's 60 million that we're holding. That's not all just our cash. Some of that is
HRA balances.
Yeah, thank you. HRA balances, money that we received in council tax that we then in due course pay over to the county council, part of our working cash flow. So not all of that 60 million is available for us to spend on those purposes, but we'll be looking at that more as part of our budget strategy rather than our treasury management strategy, because that's how we spend money on our services and our assets, where this is how we would invest that cash.
Thank you very much. Councillor Townley.
Well, I've already touched the subject with you about your borrowing capability for the future.
I thought you were just saying you're boring. Matt says that all the time. It's fine.
I can't resist asking you questions, you see. I'm going to drop you a line about the potential borrowing that you're going to take on board in respect of the program of affordable housing. It's fairly substantial. Looking at the cost of money today is something that we need to actually understand better in this Treasury report, hopefully the next time round. Yep. Thank you. I'll copy Chair into it.
Any other comments from anyone? Okay, so recommendation is that we note the actual 2022-23 Prudential and Treasury indicated in this report. We make comments as appropriate, and that we recommend this report to Council for approval. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Dabro proposed and Councillor Bright seconded. Are we agreed, members? Okay. You will be pleased to hear that that concludes tonight's proceedings. Can I thank the internal audit officers for attending and all other officers? Sorry, apologies, just before members. Councillor Matterface. Okay, I'm going to close the meeting. We'll pick that up. Thank you very much, officers, for attending, and for members. It's been an excellent meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.